Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone had a good lunch and got to figure everything out. I believe we have a motion. Jim Gilmore.
Thanks, Chair, but can I do a little preamble before the motion, or would you like the motion first, just so it may justify a little bit better?
Nope, you can do a preamble.
All right, thank you very much. And I'm starting to wonder, I'm really glad I came back. I forgot about how much fun all this stuff was, so it's great. Anyway, we find ourselves in a difficult place, which is been before, but maybe not as difficult as this one. But and we're really looking for solutions. I think a lot of us is how we can maybe make sense of all of this. And so going back to years ago, one of my first mentors when I got into resource management said, our jobs are to serve the resource. And the models, the data, the rules, the statute, those are tools to help us do that. But there was something, and maybe I'm dating myself, but we call the mother's test. So when we went all through that, if you sat there and said, does it make sense? And that was maybe more visceral because it doesn't make sense. And this one, it doesn't make any sense. So what do we do at this point? So in this particular time, we've got a lot more tools, and some of them are a lot more predictive, but we still have those issues. And not to say we should not follow the rules. I mean, if we don't follow the rules, the laws, whatever, it just would be chaotic, and I think we'd do more damage. So, however, we do have some slightly different rules between the council and the commission that we joined together because we try to manage it cooperatively, and I think we've done great jobs at that over a lot of different species over the years. But there are some nuances between those two. So, and the council and the service, I mean, they're bound by Magnuson 100%, and so is we all. My new role as the counselor, whatever, I'm bound by what Magnuson says, and so there's not a lot of latitude in that. And essentially, once we've got, in this particular case, the SSC has come up with their recommendation, we're pretty well bound to that. And I know Mike many years, and a lot of people in the service, they got a tough job because, I mean, they have to really sort all this out in the end. Again, that's a very tough job they have. However, the commission does have a little bit more latitude. And I think the commission's been involved almost in place for 80 years now, I guess is what we're coming up on. And it's, so they've had a lot more latitude in different things that they've used over the time. And the thing I think that sticks with all the analysis I've seen and everything I've read is some of that mother's test is like, so, okay, the SSC says this, but we're really still doing single species management. I mean, we talked a couple of days about ecosystem management. And great, that's where we need to get to. We need to start looking at stuff. We're not even doing multi-species management for the most part. So you start looking at, yesterday, we were overfishing fluke. We've got Scup is a little bit more improved, but then we've got, some other things like striped bass that are not doing particularly well. So we start taking big cuts on a really high population. What are we going to do? I know what I'm doing next year. If I get black sea bass, I'm going after more fluke. I'm going whatever. So is everybody else. So I really don't want to get to the point where next year we're sitting at the table and we're all going, okay, now we have to cut 4 species because we exceeded the RHL on black sea bass. We overharvested fluke, so on and so forth. So, so because of that, and again, betting more into the less scientific part of management, I think we're at a place, and I'm a little reluctant to do this, but we're in a unique spot. So, and I'll preface by saying I'm going to offer this motion as the legislative proxy for the commission. Not as a council member, but I think we need to do something, try something a little bit different. So with that preamble, I'd like to offer a motion, and the motion is to suspend the joint management rules for the board to take action on the 2025 black sea bass specifications.
So second from the board, John Clark. Thank you. I think you led with your rationale, Jim, so I'll move to the seconder. If there's anything you'd like to add, John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Mr. Gilmore covered it all very well in his inimitable way.
Is there further discussion from the board members? As I said yesterday, this is a motion that only needs to pass one of the bodies and be approved to approved. It does not preclude the bodies from both making the same motion and passing them. It just means that if the first body failed the motion, then the second body would still could still take the vote up. But I see Joe Grist. Sorry, Joe Semino.
I think we've known each other longer than you and Jen. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything Jim said. This is a tough situation to be in. I'm going to give my support as a commission member. I agree with everything Rich Wong said as well, and that's the camp I find myself in. Reading through the comments and the additional materials presented by the monitoring committee on, in particular, the projections. Honestly, it reminds me of a meme where there's two individuals and one commenting to the other. I made this nice scarf out of all the red flags you've given me. I think that that's where we are, and I don't think we could ignore that fact that there just seems to be something off, especially with with the projections. This isn't a species that we set it and forget it. We know that we have another assessment coming up. We know that we may be looking down the barrel of the same situation in a year from now. But I do think it's appropriate, and I do think that the pros outweigh the cons. I think the discussions about turning harvest into discards, the discussions about putting pressure on other species which are doing worse outweigh the kind of threat to this species in the very near future. So that's why I support it. Thank you.
Mike Louisi.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I have a point of order question. Given that the rules to suspend the rules is on the board, does this require the council to take the same action to suspend the rules? Or is it only the commission at this time that needs to vote to suspend those rules? And depending on that answer, I certainly have some comment, but I'd like to address that first. And if you need a second, or if you need a council motion, I could make that same motion as well, just to put it out there.
And speaking with leadership yesterday about this, it was just one body taking this action, suspends the rules for both bodies.
Okay, so thank you. Just a follow-up comment. So I don't know if I've had the opportunity, I guess that's the right word I'm looking for. I've had the opportunity to sit in both seats to my right, not only chair of the council, but I've also chaired the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Board years ago. And throughout that time, this joint effort that we've undertaken with the council and the commission has been one that I have advocated very strongly for maintaining that connectivity and taking steps towards management together, because the effect of not doing things together the outcome could be chaotic. And I've said time and time again that I feel like it's critically important that the commission and the council stand together and move forward together. Yet, when I think about the roles that we all play, starting with the assessment scientists and the work that they do, going to the SSC and the science advice that's being provided by the SSC, the monitoring committee weighs in on management uncertainty and management advice. The AP provides us feedback about how the fishery is performing. There are all these steps along the way, all this advice that we're getting along the way. But as a council, where I have some concern and why I'm planning to support this motion as a member of the board, is that as a council, we sometimes find ourselves in a position where we're in a corner. Our hands are tied based on the law that states that the council cannot deviate in excess from what the SSC has recommended as their science advice. Yet I think now, with the understanding that I have based on the discussions that we've all had together, and we had certainly this morning, I feel like this is an opportunity for both management bodies to be able to weigh in without some of those restrictions. And so I'm going to support this as a member of the board. I hope it is not. I hope that the folks around this table don't see this as precedent setting for every time that we get advice that doesn't necessarily jive with the way the council operates and the way the commission operates, that we end up taking we deviate from one another, because ultimately I believe it will lead to chaos, but I don't think that's going to be the case here. And therefore I'm going to support this motion to suspend the rules so that we can have that open discussion without some of those guidelines that we followed for many years prior to this. Thank you.
Chris Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday, during your opening remarks, you mentioned that this is an option the board has, but they need to be careful in when to take it and not make a habit of it. I'm probably in the very small minority here, but I don't think this issue rises to that level, and I'll try to quickly explain why. From the discussions we've had this morning, I think John Hare and Paul Rago did an excellent job of explaining kind of the differences with this new stock assessment, especially the fact that we're kind of looking at, I guess for lack of a better term, a rescaled biomass estimate based on what we know about the stock and how the model is fitting the data better. We've seen this before with new assessments that come in. Bluefish this last year with that management track assessment gave us much different catch levels than what we had from the previous assessment. I don't recall any type of discussions like that what we're having now. And basically what we're finding ourselves doing is comparing the ABCs from the ASAP model to the current the ABC from the WHAM model. It's been mentioned multiple times. We're going to get a stock assessment update next year, and there's talk of looking at some additional analyses through that management track assessment, especially at the issue of the projections, which I think upon further review, we never see that drop that the projections have historically predicted. And I think if there's a way to dive into that more next year when we set specifications for 2026 and 2027, that'd be great. I understand that the advice coming from this assessment is a tough sell for the stakeholders and the managers, and I guess to not make light of it, but just kind of put the impacts on the fisheries kind of in perspective. Of what we're looking at, with this 20% reduction and the specifications coming out of it. Is this a reminder that a reduction in commercial quota doesn't necessarily mean a reduction in commercial landings, and the 2025 quota from this ABC is slightly above the landings in 2023, and the 2024 landings are kind of on a similar trajectory as what we saw in 2023. And it was also mentioned that under the percent change approach, the recreational reduction would be no greater than 10% and won't be the full 20%. However, I know that's going to be a difficult task, especially in New England and in New York, that have the high size limit small bags and in short seasons already. But I guess I'll just close by saying, I understand why the board wants to do this. I understand the concerns that have been raised on this, and I would probably. I might be sympathetic, or at least agree with going that route if we were setting catch levels for the next several years based on this assessment. and having to, work with those catch levels with the uncertain projections that we're seeing right now. But again, we're getting an assessment update next year. It's a luxury we have in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, where we get these assessments every couple of years. Because in the Southeast, it's every 5 years if you're lucky. So that's it. Thanks.
Are there any other further comments around the room as to the motion to suspend the joint management process? John Maniscalco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I agree entirely with what Mike Luisi said. And I also agree most with the majority of what Chris Bat-Savage said, but why it's particularly appropriate for black sea bass. We're looking at a stock that is incredibly healthy with the 20 to 20%, of the biomass target. I don't think that this action for a single year puts the stock in any risk. But I do think we're at great risk of further alienating all our many stakeholders. And for that reason, I could support this motion. Thank you.
Any comments from the public on this particular motion? Okay, back to the board one last time. Do states need a moment to caucus on this? Please raise your hand if you do. I know that there's some people remote, some people in the room. So if anyone needs a moment to caucus, not seeing any. So we'll call the question then. On the motion to suspend joint management process rules for the board to take action on 2025 black sea bass specifications. Those in favor, please raise your hand. Tony, do you want to call out the states, please? Thank you.
Okay. Rhode Island, Connecticut, Delaware, Massachusetts, New York, Maryland, and New Hampshire, New Jersey, Virginia, and Potomac River Fisheries Commission.
Please lower your hands. Those opposed? Those opposed, please raise your hand.
North Carolina.
Any null votes?
No.
Any abstentions?
No fisheries.
Motion carries 10 to 1 abstention. Yeah. So at this point, we would be looking for a motion from the board or the council to set specifications for 2025. Any hands? All right. Jim?
But you guys had those pre-made motions, so I'll try to do this on the fly. Oh, you do? Okay. Exactly what I was going to say. Move to adopt the following status quo specifications for black sea bass for 2025. The recreational ACL equals the ACT equals 9.16 million pounds with an RHL of 6.27 million pounds. The commercial ACL equals ACT equals 7.5 million pounds with a commercial quota of 6 million pounds. The commercial in-season closure buffer is 5% and no changes to the other commercial measures which can be modified through specifications.
Is there a second to the motion? John Clark? Would you like to address the motion further, Jim?
Yeah, I think it's all pretty much been said. We were before with, I think this makes sense at this point, and I'll echo what a lot of people have said. This is not really precedent. This is a unique thing, and I hope to God we never do this again because we really need to act in concert, but this is a very unique time. And so I think we should go this way. Thank you.
Mike Luisi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given that we have a motion on behalf of the board and based on what Jim just said about maybe trying to figure out a way to maintain some connectivity between the board and the council, Mr. Chairman, if it's appropriate, I would be comfortable making this same motion on behalf of the council to see if ultimately at the end of the day, we may all feel the same way. And therefore, the deviation from the standard is maybe doesn't have to apply, but it's in the background in case it needs to. But I'll ask whether that's something that's an appropriate motion, given some of the constraints that the council's under.
Okay. So you're going to make a motion on that? Okay.
If you'd allow it,
Yes.
I'd make that same motion on behalf of the council.
Yes. And I got a second by Scott Lennox. Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I guess I was going to speak to the board motion. I have to speak to both. I understand the intent behind the procedural motion, which I've abstained on because it was a procedural motion. I understand the intent behind the board motion for status quo. You know, we're learning a lot about what's changing in the ocean, and over lunch, I got a forwarded from Janet Coit link to an article of a 6-foot tarpon caught off the beach in Rhode Island. So something is happening out there that's changing what we expect and changing our expectations. So I understand a lot of what's behind the motion for status quo, but I do caution the board. I'll vote against it for the agency, but I caution the board that Mike Luisi's motion for the council notwithstanding, it's potentially setting us up to have divergent quotas, which it's been a while since we've gone down that road, but we have gone down that road, and it wasn't pleasant for anybody. It creates potential disputes for federal permit holders versus state permit holders. It creates situations that we then have to struggle to find our way back out of. It may be that we end up potentially implementing different quotas and managing to different, having a coast-wide quota that's less than the sum of the state allocations, which has some potentially disparate effects on states. Or it could be something that administratively I have to try to resolve. And so we would figure that out through our rulemaking. But just in light of the requirement, as has already been mentioned, for the council to act consistent with the Magnuson Act, I'm going to vote against this motion for the board. To Mike Luisi's council motion, that quite frankly is not approvable. If the council were to submit that to me, I will disapprove it. The Magnuson Act is quite clear that the council, and I can even read the text just so everybody knows I'm not making it up. The council shall develop annual catch limits for each of its managed fisheries that may not exceed the fishing level recommendations of its scientific and statistical committee. So, to be blunt, the council can't do that and be consistent with the Magnuson Act. As Mr. Gilmore stated in his preamble, the commission has more flexibility. The commission's not bound to that provision of the Magnuson Act. So as again, I understand why the board is making, this motion is before the board, and I understand why there might be some incentive to adopt this. But for the council, I don't see how that's a workable path forward. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will just wanted to let people know I'll be voting against this for the board and certainly voting against this for the council.
Questions, comments from the council or the board? Jeff Kayla?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with this disparity on the horizon, does this mean that the recreational sector would be status quo, but the commercial sector would take a 20% hit in federal waters? Would that be the outcome of where this discussion is?
That's a question for you, yeah.
Two-part answer to your question. If we implement the quota as recommended by the council's SSC, that would be a reduction for the commercial fleet, coastwide. The RHL would be also lower, but as Julia has described, the RHL alone does not determine what the recreational measures would be for 2025. It would be a review of performance in 2024 and looking through the recreational harvest control rule process to look at the, that process is what would control and determine the management measures for the recreational fishery, which may be a 10% reduction, maybe something else, but it's premature to guess what the outcome of that process would be.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. There's a lot of talk around the table about what the constituencies are going to say. This is another one that I would add to the list.
Anyone else around the table? Anyone from the audience? Greg?
Greg DiDomenico, on behalf of the Lund's Fisheries, we do not support either of these motions. Thank you.
Dan Farnham?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to something that Chris Bassavage pointed out earlier. The commercial dead catch was 21% lower than the ACL in 23 and 33% lower than the ACL in 22. So am I right? Would a 20% reduction on the commercial quota, would it have any effect at all on the commercial sector?
Tony?
So as both the council and the board know, we do have state by state commercial quotas. It's through the commission's FMP. And there are several states that do come very close to or do catch their entire commercial quota. There are some states that have IFQs for their quota. So those states do not transfer quota to other states because they cannot. And so their quota stays on the table when they don't fully utilize it. And so in this case, there will be states that will face reductions if we have a 20% reduction. In some states, maybe not, but their quota is not transferable to the other states to get utilized.
Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for Mr. Pentney. You said something about the potential to address the discrepancy through an administrative action. I was hoping that you could expand on that for us.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. There is a provision of the regulations for black sea bass. It's under where is it under 648 143E, which is the accountability measure section of the regs. And it's kind of an interesting read. It says if the total catch, allowable landings, quotas, and/or recreational harvest limit adopted by the Commission, Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Board, and the Council differ for a given fishing year, administrative action will be taken as soon as possible to revisit the respective recommendations of the two groups. The intent of this action shall be to achieve alignment through consistent state and federal measures such that no differential effects occur to federal permit holders. And to my knowledge, we have never actually had to go down that road. So this is new ground. So To explain exactly how that would play out, I can't because we haven't actually utilized this. But it would be something that should the council and the board end up with a disconnect in terms of the quotas that are adopted here today. And then when we pursue our rulemaking, proposed and final rulemaking, we would be looking at this particular regulation and seeing what opportunities or flexibility there would be for us to ensure alignment as the intent of this regulation. I don't exactly know what that means because I said we haven't utilized this before. But that's what I was referring to when I mentioned administrative action. That's what's called for in this regulation.
Kate Wilkie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it short and sweet. Harkening back to the comments that Mr. Pentney made about the council being bound to adhere to Magnuson and follow the SSC ABC recommendation, the Nature Conservancy does not support this motion either. Thank you.
All right, any additional hands for comments? Do states need a moment to caucus? We will take this up as a board vote first. Okay, not seeing any hands to caucus. Oh, Eric, yes, see a moment to caucus or point of order? Moment, okay, let's take 2 minutes. Thank you. All right, if board members can take their seats again. Tony, I'll ask you to call out the states once again. All those in favor of the motion for status quo specifications, please raise your hand.
Connecticut, Delaware, Massachusetts, New York, Maryland. Thanks, Virginia. New Jersey. Potomac River Fisheries Commission, New Hampshire. We're missing we're missing the state of Rhode Island. Are you a yes or a no? Still caucusing. Are you a yes or a no or?
Don't worry about it. It's taking more of a beating than that. Rhode Island is a no vote.
Hands down online, please. Pat and Ron, if you can lower your hands. Thank you. Those opposed to the motion, please raise your hand.
North Carolina, no fisheries.
Please lower your hands. No vote.
Rhode Island.
Any abstentions? Okay. Seeing none, the motion carries the board 9-2 with 1 null vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to bring this to the council now for vote, but Mike Luisi wants to have some rationale.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I thought I'd speak to this briefly, and I promise I'll be brief. I hope that the folks around this table and in the audience listening online can appreciate the position that a handful of us around this table are in. I'm serving two different management bodies here today, and I'm the vice chairman of one of the management bodies. So it can be complicated in here in my mind as to how we navigate through these issues and the complexity of these issues. I completely understand the points that Mike Penny made regarding whether or not this council decides to support this motion or not. I also want to say on the record that I believe that the science is much better than it was, and we're moving in the right direction between the science and the work that the SSC did to provide its recommendation. The motion that I made here for status quo is not reflective of my opinion of what either the science or the SSC's recommendation, but it's more about providing feedback to the service on how this council would like to take its next steps. And in my mind, supporting a motion like this for status quo and having that motion disapproved is different from either taking no action or recommending status quo only because we're bound to do that. And that is what I've been thinking about for the last few days, and that is the reason why I decided to put this on the record and make the motion that I did, and I hope it can be supported. Thank you.
Peter Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I still have a little bit of confusion in my head, a little fog. RA has told us that he's not going to support this and he'd go to administrative rulemaking because this is outside of what we're charged with, and that's following Magnuson. And this doesn't follow the advice of the SSC. So he'd find it out of compliance and then go to rulemaking. Is that what we want? Should we vote this up to do that? Or do you think there'd be another motion coming? I just don't know.
When you refer to another motion coming, a motion like what the staff recommendation is, what the SSC recommends?
Yeah.
I mean, if this fails, then yes, and we would fall back on that. Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Rather than hopefully belabor this with a vote and continue discussion, I'm going to make a motion to substitute. I think staff has the motion that would be consistent with the SSC recommendation ready to go. If so, I would like to move to substitute to adopt the following specifications for Black Sea Bass for 2025. Recreational ACL equals ACT equals 7.31 million pounds with an RHL of 4.46 million pounds. Commercial ACL equals ACT equals 5.98 million pounds with a commercial quota of 4.78 million pounds. Commercial in-season closure buffer will be 5%. And no changes to the other commercial measures, which can be modified through the specifications. And if I get a second, I'll provide additional rationale.
Michelle Duval with a second. Mike, go ahead and provide your rationale.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. This is really, I believe, the only motion the council can adopt in good conscience that's consistent with the Magnuson Act. Anything else, the motion that this is proposed to substitute is blatantly inconsistent with the Magnuson Act and contravenes the Magnuson Act. So I would hope that rather than ask people to vote against that motion, understanding the intent, I would simply ask people to support this motion and move on as the council is expected to do. Thank you. And we don't need a motion for the board on this.
And Michelle Duval seconded that. Michelle Duval. Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I think this whole situation is the definition of a rock and a hard place, right? You know, this is not really where we want to find ourselves. You know, and I agree with Mr. Pentney. You know, I think this is the only option really for the council moving forward. It's why I seconded it. That does not mean that I am not, that I don't appreciate or haven't, you know, considered all of the comments that we've heard from our advisors. You know, I'm particularly grateful to the monitoring committee for, you know, digging into this issue. You know, I appreciate the graphic that Julia pulled up from the comment portal and showed that today. You know, I would love to see a few additional pieces of information, you know, added to that. I think it would be helpful to also overlay, you know, the graphs of SSB from the corresponding assessments from which those projections came. And I would certainly be interested, you know, if there is the bandwidth for, you know, a subgroup of the SSC to, you know, perhaps consider, you know, evaluating or digging into some of the projection assumptions. That seems to be, you know, the crux of the issue that we're facing here. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me the opportunity to provide some comment with respect to why I seconded the motion.
Any more comments? Let's go ahead and call the vote. We're going to do this by raising of hands in the room. Chris Pat Savage, you will be raising your hand on the computer. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I see 9. I see 10 yeses. Chris, put your hand down, please. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay. Everybody put your hands down. Any abstentions? Mm-hmm. All right, with that, the substitute motion passes 10-5 with 4 abstentions. This now becomes the main motion. Do we need any further Discussion on the motion? All right, this time, let's go ahead and call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Chris Bat Savage on the line, please. $16, including Chris Bat Savage. Everybody put their hands down. All those opposed, raise your hand. 3 opposed. Any abstentions? 1. Motion passes 16, 3-1. Eric Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I couldn't hear what my fellow commissioners were trying to tell me in the confusion. Rhode Island on the last vote is not a null vote, it is a no vote, for the record.
Julia, if you could make that a 9300, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Sorry, there was 1 abstention. No, there wasn't. No, there wasn't. It was a no.
All right, Julia, is there anything else you need to bring before us at this time?
So the numbers don't match. There's 20 council votes on this for the substitute as main motion and 19 on the motion to substitute. I just want to make sure all the numbers are right. I mean, I guess it doesn't impact if it passes or not, but I just want to make sure I counted those right.
That's the same numbers we had up here too.
Okay. Yeah. I think we're good.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, with that, the council, I'm going to dismiss the council briefly. The board has a little bit of action to do. So we'll be ready in how long do you think?
We'll be ready in 3 minutes for the board only actions, which I believe we can probably get done in 15 to 20 minutes or?
It'll take literally, if we can just go right into it, Nicola, we'll be
done in 3 minutes.
We will be done in 3
Okay,
minutes.
so council members don't go anywhere, I think is the message.
2:15 and everybody come back at 2:15.
Okay.
Say that, Skip.
Why don't council members, we'll plan on being back here at 2:15.
Can we get, never mind.
So we will be convening as the board only to review the FMP reviews for Fluke, Scup, and Sea Bass. And then subsequently to elect a vice chair. Chelsea Toohey of commission staff will be giving us a brief presentation. When you're ready, Chelsea, please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So I am going to be running through the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass FMP reviews very quickly. Julia, Kylie, and Hannah, already covered much of this information. So we're just going to jump right into the PRT recommendations. So for sea bass, there were no de minimis requests, and the PRT determined that all states appear to have regulations consistent with the FMP provisions for the 2023 fishing year, except for one issue, which is in the process of being rectified, and that is that the Connecticut regulation did not include the requirement of 2 escape vents in the parlor portion of the trap or pot. This is in the process of being rectified via direct regulation change to be finalized in 2024. And so that concludes the Black Sea Bass review. Moving into the Summer Flounder FMP review, The only issue noted for summer flounder in 2023 is that New Jersey still does not have in place regulations prohibiting the transfer at sea. This is not the first year that the PRT has flagged this issue for summer flounder. State staff from New Jersey have indicated that the rulemaking package that contains an update to prohibit transfers at sea is still being processed in the governor's office. And then for summer flounder, we did have one de minimis request from Delaware, and Delaware meets the requirements for de minimis status. And then moving on to Scup, the Scup FMP review for the 2023 fishing year found that all states have implemented regulations consistent with the FMP requirements. And then again, for Scup, Delaware has requested de minimis status and meets the requirements for 2023. And that wraps up the summer flounder, Scup, and black sea bass FMP reviews. And I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
All right, thank you, Chelsea, for making that very quick. Are there any questions from the board members? Eric Reed.
Do you need a motion? If you do you have one?
We do have a draft motion. If you'd like to ever, any other questions? Seeing, oh, yeah, one more. Let's do one more question first, Eric, and then I'll come back to you.
Just and really more to Joe, as a guy who's dealt with regulations trying to get them through, is there an estimate on how long that'll take? Because sometimes, believe it or not, I've asked for a non-compliance finding to motivate the gang up north. But anyway, just a rough estimate as to when that would be done.
Yeah, so no, our governor's office is considering themselves in transition already. And we're 18 months out with a package that's been sitting for a while. But aside from that, this is, this has been decades in the making, and there's not really a loophole. Our fishing vessels are required to have a federal permit and are held to those federal standards. We've pointed this out. I think in quieter times, at some point, one of the FMP coordinators discovered this, and it's been pointed out for 3 or 4 years in a row. Even though we don't see a loophole, we promised to put this in our package for state waters, but all our boats are required to have federal permits and fish in federal waters. So.
All right, appreciate that additional information, Joe. Eric, I'll go back to you if you would like to make this motion.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I move to approve the summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass FMP reviews for the 2023 fishing year, state compliance reports, and de minimis requests from Delaware for summer flounder and scup.
Sorry, Joe Semino, thank you for the second. I'm guessing it's going to be no. We'll just move straight to a vote unless there's any further comment from the board. Is there any opposition to this motion? Seeing none, the motion is approved by consent. And our last board-only item here would be to look for a nomination for the vice chair of the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Management Board, John Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is my pleasure to nominate John Maniscalco from New York as Vice Chair of the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Management Board.
Okay, thank you, John. I see a second from Jeff Kalin. Any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is approved. Congratulations, John. And that's all the agenda items to come before the board right now. So as previously stated, we'll reconvene as a joint body at 2:15.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's get to start with our afternoon agenda items. Recreational measure setting process framework and addendum. This is a joint meeting with the Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission Interstate Fishery Management Program Policy Board. We're going to have presenters Julia Beatty from council staff, Chelsea Toohey, Tracy Bauer, and Tom Miller. I'm not sure the order everybody's going to be presenting. Expected outcomes, we need to adopt modifications to the draft range of alternatives. And whenever you guys are ready.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So today, Julia, Tracy, and I are going to be giving an update on the progress for the summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and bluefish recreational measure setting process framework and addenda. Oh, shoot. I went too far. Okay. So to give a brief overview of the presentation today, we're going to be going over some background on this action. We'll talk about the alternatives under consideration and the FMAP and PDT recommendations to date. Then Tom Miller, who is the chair of the SSC subgroup that reviewed this action, will go over the SSC review, and that report was included as part of the meeting materials. And then Tracy will wrap us up with some next steps. And again, the objective for today is for the council to consider approval of the modified draft range of alternatives. So the goal of the recreational measure setting process is to consider the appropriate process for setting recreational measures for 2026 and beyond. As a reminder, the percent change approach that we currently use to set recreational management measures will sunset at the end of 2025. And if it is not replaced through this action, we will revert back to the previous process of setting recreational management measures for the 4 species that aim to achieve but not exceed the RHL. And we set those measures annually, as opposed to the percent change approach, which sets measures or aims to set measures on a 2-year timeframe. So the goal statement of the harvest control rule, which implemented the percent change approach, was to establish a process for setting recreational management measures that prevents overfishing, is reflective of stock status, appropriately accounts for uncertainty in the recreational data, takes into consideration angler preferences, and provides an appropriate level of stability and predictability in changes from year to year. And this statement does not need to change the recreational measure setting process, and the FMAP PDT does not recommend any changes at this time. The statement of the problem for this action will be outlined in the draft addenda documents that the board and council will review later this year. So the Policy Board and Council last received an update on this action in December of 2023. And since then, the FMAP PDT has been working to revise the range of alternatives. And just one important note is that the FMAP and PDT will continue to work after this meeting to revise those alternatives. And in October, at the Commission's annual meeting, the Board and Policy Board and Council will meet again to approve that finalized range of draft alternatives. So after today, the alternatives may change a little bit based on further FMAP and PDT work. So now getting into the FMAP PDT recommendations and the alternatives under consideration. But sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with the clicker here. But before we get into the alternatives, we did want to note some important things for stocks that have been declared overfished and are in rebuilding plans. So under all of the alternatives under consideration in this action, stock under an approved rebuilding plan would be subject to the requirements of that rebuilding plan, and none of the alternatives replace rebuilding plan measures. Measures may be implemented through the alternatives, and they can be used as temporary measures until a rebuilding plan is implemented, because rebuilding plans can take up to 2 years after a stock is declared overfished to be implemented. So the alternatives can be used in that 2-year interim period. But once a rebuilding plan is put in place, the stocks, such as bluefishes now, will be subject to that rebuilding plan. The first alternative under consideration is the no action or status quo alternative. And if no action is taken, again, the percent change approach will sunset and the previous FMP requirements will be used for setting 2026 measures and beyond. And again, those are for measures to aim to achieve but not exceed the RHL, and measures will be set for 1 year at a time. The next alternative under consideration is the percent change approach as currently implemented, meaning the percent change approach that we use today in 2024 to set recreational management measures. In the interest of time, we will not go over the percent change approach as currently implemented, as it is the approach that we are currently using. And I'll pass it over to Julia, who's going to take us through the remainder of the alternatives.
Thanks. So the next alternative that the FMAT and PDT is recommending for consideration is a modified version of the percent change approach with 3 changes that are listed on the screen here. And this would be considered as a separate alternative. So the first change would be to add an around the target biomass category. This modified version also adds more status quo outcomes, and it treats overfish stocks separately. So this table highlights the addition of the around the target biomass category. And the rationale for adding this category is that the previous approach, if a stock was slightly above or slightly below the target, treated it as either low or high or very high. And the FMAT and PDT thought it would be more appropriate to have this new category with a stock that's either within a range of 10% above or below the target, that would all be treated the same, and it's not really, it would be treated differently than stocks that are low or high. So that would add an additional biomass category to what's already there. And then next I'll walk through quickly the addition of more status quo outcomes compared to the current version. So what's highlighted here means there would be no liberalization or reduction. It would be status quo expected harvest in all cases where the upcoming 2-year average RHL is within your confidence interval of your expectation of harvest under status quo measures, which means if you leave measures alone, you would expect harvest to be close to the RHL. Under the currently implemented version, there's 3 different outcomes there. Could be 10% liberalization, 10% reduction status quo, depending on biomass. But the FMAT and PDT thought it would be appropriate, just given the statistical consideration, you're within the confidence interval, you don't expect harvest to be notably above or below the RHL, that regardless of biomass level, unless the stock is overfished, that just do no liberalization or reduction. So that would be more status quo outcomes compared to the current approach. In addition, it adds a status quo outcome to this next cell that's highlighted here. This is when, if you leave measures unchanged, you are expecting an RHL overage, but biomass is very high. So the FMAT and PDT thinks it would be acceptable to have status quo in this situation unless an AM is triggered. So AMs do apply under all of the outcomes here, but they thought it would be appropriate to highlight it for this specific outcome because this is saying that you can have an RHL overage, whereas the other outcomes are not as explicit about that. So if an AM is triggered, you may need to take action to address that. But otherwise, when biomass is very high, you can have a status quo outcome in this specific case, where currently it requires a 10% reduction. The flip side is also having a status quo outcome where there's currently a 10% liberalization for our stocks that are in the low biomass category, but an RHL underage is expected. So if we were just aiming to meet the RHL, then we would be allowing a liberalization here. And along that rationale, the current approach allows a 10% liberalization, but the FMAT and PDT thought status quo is more appropriate given that biomass is in that low category. And then the last change recommended for this alternative is to pull overfish stocks out of this table altogether and have this separate subtable to treat overfish stocks separately. So as Chelsea described, this is only establishing a process for setting recreational measures prior to implementation of an approved rebuilding plan. And once the rebuilding plan is in place, that rebuilding plan would take over. So what this would do is it would not allow any liberalizations for stocks that are overfished but haven't yet had the implemented rebuilding plan. And if a reduction is needed, that reduction percentage would be basically setting it based on the RHL and just reiterating that it would be replaced with rebuilding plan measures as soon as possible. And so this table, I know it's hard to read it all, especially from far away, but this is just summarizing all of those changes together just to show you the package of what this alternative would look like. The next alternative under consideration is a modified version of the biomass-based matrix approach. So this alternative was originally developed through that previous framework and addenda, but multiple changes are recommended to it, and all of the changes are incorporated onto the screen here. I will reiterate that this and the other alternatives that the FMET and PDT recommends keeping in this action, there are plans to further develop them. So, and this is an example of the FMET and PDT are planning to have further conversations about some of the details of this alternative. So some of the specific liberalizations and reductions might be revisited. There might be consideration of combining some of these categories, but so just think of this as like an overall idea of what this alternative does, but there might be further refinements before we come back to this at the October Council and Policy Board meeting. So this alternative would consider changes and measures based on biomass compared to the target and whether biomass is increasing, stable, or decreasing. And you can see here that the biomass compared to the target has some of the same categories as the modified percent change approach, with the addition of a near overfish category to allow for a little bit of a more conservative approach before we get all the way to the overfished category, which again would still be temporary measures until a rebuilding plan is implemented. And you know, without walking through each of the outcomes, you can see here that there's some cases that have a 10% liberalization, some outcomes have status quo, and some outcomes have reductions. And for only the near overfished and overfished categories, measures would be set to achieve the recreational ACL with a minimum reduction percentage that varies and no liberalizations allowed. So again, these will all be further refined, but the FMET and PDT has it set up this way to be a little bit more liberal and a little bit more precautionary based on the stock status indicators. They also discussed that this alternative, as it was originally envisioned and this modified version, the primary indicators are biomass compared to the target and biomass trend. And they had a discussion of how to pull in greater consideration of if overfishing is occurring or not, because that previously wasn't part of this alternative. So their current recommendation is to just say this table on the screen here only applies when overfishing is not occurring. And when overfishing is occurring, instead measures will be set with the goal of allowing catch to meet but not exceed the ACL regardless of biomass level. So this would help be more proactive in focusing on this specific management target when overfishing is occurring. And there was discussion of if your F compared to the F reference point is close, or if you're overfishing just a little bit, or if you're overfishing a lot, hopefully that could be factored into your comparison to the ACL, and that you might need a smaller change when you're just overfishing by a little bit and a bigger change when you're overfishing by a lot. But again, this whole alternative will be considered in more detail between now and October. Additionally, there's 3 other topics that the FMET and PDT is planning to further develop over the next month or so. And these are not alternatives. These are topics that will be considered in the context of the previously described alternatives. So this includes spelling out specifically how the accountability measures work under each alternative. We've had some discussions of that, but we were purposely waiting until the alternatives were more fleshed out before we clarify how accountability measures factor in. Similarly, the same thing for the role of management uncertainty in terms of that buffer between the ACL and the ACT that might play a different role under the different alternatives, because the ACL and the RHL play different roles under the different alternatives. So that will be clarified. And then also the Council and Policy Board previously asked for consideration of impacts to the commercial sector. And some of that has been done through the SSC review, which will be covered by Tom Miller's presentation. But the FMET and PDT might have further discussions of that to think about if any additional analysis needs to be done there. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tracy, who's online, and she's going to cover a few more slides on the range of alternatives.
Thanks, Julia. So I will be reviewing alternatives and other topics considered but not recommended by the FMAP PDT for inclusion in this action, and will explain the FMAP PDT's rationale for each recommendation. Next slide, please. So I'll start off with the biological reference point approach. The biological reference point approach, as shown on the slide, was one of the alternatives that the FMAP PDT was directed to further develop by the Policy Board and Council's June 2022 motion, back when the Harvest Control Rule Framework Addendum was approved. I'm not going to go into the details of how this approach worked, but the main indicators that were used in this approach were whether or not overfishing was occurring, biomass compared to the target level, biomass trend, recruitment trend, and whether recent harvest limits were exceeded. Next slide, please. So the FMAP PDT spent a good amount of time discussing modifications to this alternative and were looking for potential ways to improve it. However, the FMAP PDT's discussion of this alternative, especially some discussion involving some decision trees that the FMAP PDT had put together to help the FMAP PDT walk through the steps of this alternative and other considerations, essentially led to the FMAP PDT to conclude that the complexity of this alternative did not add to or lead to any real benefits. As has been noted in public comment of the previous Harvest Control Rule Framework Addenda, this alternative is very difficult to explain to managers and stakeholders, and the FMAP PDT themselves had difficulty understanding how it would work in real scenarios for management for these species. When discussing the future of development of this alternative, the FMAP PDT also agreed with the SSC's comments, which you will hear in a bit from Tom Miller, that recruitment estimates were not likely to be a reliable indicator to use to make management decisions due to the uncertainty around the recruitment estimates. So for all these reasons, the FMAP PDT recommends moving this alternative to considered but rejected in this management action. Next slide, please. Next, F-based approaches. The June 2022 motion by the Council and Policy Board had tasked the FMAP PDT with further developing F-based approaches for the percent change approach. There had been no consideration of this in the previous management action because of how late it was brought up in the development of the Harvest Control Rule Framework Addenda right before final action. So in this management action to tackle this task, the FMAP PDT and an independent contractor worked on developing two separate approaches that could be used to incorporate recreational fishing mortality rates and targets into the framework addenda. The FMAP PDT also discussed various ways that these approaches could be used, such as incorporating them into one or more of the existing alternatives as a new fishery or stock status indicator, or as a standalone approach. A standalone F-based approach would mean measures would be set to achieve a recreational F target. So after much consideration on F-based approaches, the FMAP PDT ultimately agreed with the SSC's recommendation, which Tom Miller again will cover shortly, that more development and analysis was needed before F-based approaches would be considered ready for management use. For example, only 1 or 2 species were tested with these F-based approaches, and the FMAP PDT agreed it would be necessary to see how they'd function for all 4 species before these approaches could be considered further. So therefore, the FMAP PDT is recommending that the F-based approaches issue be moved to considered but rejected. However, the FMAP PDT recognizes the potential of these F-based approaches for summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and bluefish management. And if the Policy Board and Council are interested in continuing development of this approach, the FMAP PDT recommends F-based approaches be considered in a future management action. However, the FMAP PDT does also note they do not recommend any sort of expedited timeline to further develop this approach. And something like this is really a big substantial change from how we're doing in management right now and would need some thorough evaluation. Next slide, please. So lastly, the starting point for measures. The Council and Policy Board had also tasked the FMAP PDT with reevaluating the starting point for measures under all alternatives and consider alternative starting points. Evaluation of this issue was in response to significant stakeholder frustration with current measures because they did not feel that they were aligned with stock status. So for example, black sea bass measures are currently more restrictive now compared to when biomass was more than, or now when the biomass is more than double the target level compared to what they were like when the stock was under a rebuilding plan. So the FMAP PDT discussed potential avenues for how to evaluate new starting points for measures, but had difficulty in determining how analysis on this issue could be accomplished, especially within the timeline of this management action. One idea that was considered was to use the recreation demand model to evaluate how alternative sets of measures for one or more species would impact estimated harvest. However, after discussions with Northeast Fishery Science Center staff, it was determined that their current workload would not allow for extra runs of the recreation demand model. The recreation demand model, since it's not currently available on the cloud, is currently taking multiple days to finish analyzing just one set of measures on a desktop computer. And the FMAP PDT was unable to determine an alternative method to analyze starting points for measures. And the FMAP PDT agreed that without a quantitative analysis, changing the starting point would feel arbitrary. So when discussing paths forward for the starting point for measures issue, the FMAP PDT noted that there was, again, limited amount of time remaining in the timeline of this management action with several other topics, like Julia just mentioned, that still need to be considered. They also expressed concern about how a revised starting point could be justified, especially if the desire is for more liberal measures when stocks are already close to or exceeding their recreational ACLs. Lastly, it was also noted that revisions to the alternatives as presented today by Julia may have more opportunities for repeated liberalizations for stocks with very high biomass compared to the current or previous approach. And more opportunities for liberalization may at least partially address this concern about current management measures. So as a result of all this discussion and reasoning, the FMAP PDT recommends this issue also be removed to considered but rejected. And now I'm going to pass the baton over to Tom Miller to cover the SSC review.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's been a while since I've addressed the council, so it's a pleasure to be back. It's always good to see the passion and professionalism you bring to your discussions. And I think that was certainly on show in the previous agenda item, so thank you for that. My role today is to present the SSC review of the process you've just heard about. I will thank the FMAT and PDT for allowing us to look under the hood. It was for them, it was a little like designing the plane as they were flying it while four pointy-headed academics lobbed grenades. So perhaps not the smoothest of processes, but I think there has been some benefit to both parties from going through this process. In the slides that follow, if the slide has a blue title, it is responding directly to one of the terms of reference we were given. If the slide doesn't have a blue title, it's there just to frame the discussion. So our first term of reference was to ask us to comment on whether any of the alternatives would affect the SSC determination of the ABC. We gave the same answer to this question when you asked us last time. The answer to that question is no, because as you see from the flow chart, which you've seen in various forms multiple times today, the ABC determination precedes the determination of quota and RHL. So we would still undergo the same process of integrating the council's risk policy and addressing scientific uncertainty into our discussions. The only thing the SSC noted in addition to that is that when projections are involved, and only when projections are involved, and typically for stocks that are healthy, the SSC uses currently an assumption that the ABC will be fully caught in its projections. And if the empirical evidence suggests that the ABC is being exceeded, the SSC will have to take that into account and may therefore lower ABCs in projections. We note this is not the SSC delving into management uncertainty. This is the SEC responding to its mandate that we cannot set an ABC recommendation that we know leads to overfishing. So we're going to preface our review of the FMAT PDC's work as a control process. And I'm going to draw an analogy to the way the temperature in this room is regulated during the meeting. There's a thermostat somewhere in this room that sets the temperature. As part of that thermostat, there's a sensor that measures the room temperature. It transmits that to the HVAC system, and that either pumps cold air or hot air into the room to control the process. It is formed by a number of different processes, as I've described. There's a goal, there are observations, in that case, that come from the sensor, and there is a control process that responds to those observations and adjusts, determining whether or not the level of temperature in the room is below or above the goal. For the room temperature to be regulated, all of those processes have to work in unison. They have to be complementary. We draw the analogy to the fishery management system, where at the moment, the board sets an RHL, it determines regulations, stakeholders go out, catch their fish, those catch information are fed into the management system, into the control process, which then resets the goal. And for this system to work, all of these components have to be considered. The control process, the observations, and the goal, just as they are in designing how the temperature is controlled in this room. And so I'm going to make reference to these ideas of control process, observations, and goals in the following slides. Our second term of reference was to assess the alternative in terms of, do they provide stability in the recreational management? Do they respond to stock status appropriately? And will they be expected to prevent overfishing? I'll note, as I said at the beginning, we reviewed preliminary versions of the recommendations that will ultimately be for you in October, and you've already seen some of the changes those recommendations had on the package of information. As you've heard from the presentation already, the FMAT and PDT has put a great deal of work in trying to design and understand the control process. But the control process is only part of the system of decisions that have to be taken. And the SSC found that the analysis and evaluations of the observations have really not followed the same level of consideration that has been given to the control process. The other point that we will highlight is that the alternatives all change the goal. We're no longer setting an RHL, we're setting a change in recreational harvest. And I think we just need to be very clear that that's a change in the process that's going on. The SSC strongly supports the continued evaluation of the alternatives. The FMAT and PDT are continuing their work. And we, as I said, strongly support the continuation of that. Part of this term of reference asked us to comment on socioeconomic considerations. And aside from some of the objectives in the management strategy evaluation, we heard very little about what was termed angler welfare. And we just raised that as an observation. I'm not pausing for dramatic effect. I'm waiting for the slide to advance. Press the button twice at once. While we're waiting for that, some of the general or some of the... All right, there we go. The third term of reference, as I said, asked us to comment on these things. We gave, in addition to those general comments, we gave specific observations. One of the observations was the 4 species that are covered in this framework and addenda have very different biologies, ecologies, and current stock status. And whether or not they can be managed under the same framework, I think, is an open question. As you saw in the presentation, each of the control processes that the FMAT and PDT are bringing forward is very well balanced. There are almost the same number of cases of liberalization as there are restrictions and status quo actions. And that leads you to think that there is as much likelihood of regulations being liberalized as restricted as remaining the same. But the assumption behind that is that the stock has an equal likelihood of being all of those boxes. And our thought process in the SSC is that that's not the case. Stocks will tend to remain in one or more of those boxes for extended periods of time. And so some consideration of duration that a stock is in a box would be very helpful. I commented in the previous slide about the consideration of the observation part of the control process being incomplete. Some of the things we highlighted to the FMAT and PDT are that most of the observations they're talking about are autocorrelated. That is, it's more likely to be similar to last year than something different. That hasn't been fully considered. There's a lot of uncertainty in many of these parameters, and consideration of variance was incomplete. Also, the frequency and magnitude of the changes that the control process has may introduce instability. The first house I had an HVAC system where the fan was either on or off, right? Not of continuous variable control speed on the fan. And these control processes have that sort of characteristic. It is a discrete control process. It's either one or the other. It isn't a continuously variable control process. And the SSC has expressed some concern over that point. Again, pausing for dramatic effects. Are the fishery and stock status indicators and associated threshold values reasonable? They are certainly reasonable. There has been careful consideration by the SSC, by the FMAT and PDT for the values. We express some concern over the use of trends and would recommend a more complete evaluation of how trends are going to be detected than has been made to date. For example, for the state of the ecosystem approach or report that you receive each year, trends are not plotted unless there is 30 years of data. The approaches that the FMAT and PDT discussed with us were far shorter than that. And there is a risk when you identify trends too soon that you follow the noise in the data rather than the underlying signal. And in those cases, you will respond incorrectly. And as you heard, we expressed doubt over the use of recruitment time series in the control process. We found the work that had been done for F-based approaches very appealing and worthy of continued support. But as you heard, we also found that it was too preliminary to serve a foundation upon which you could make regulatory decisions. We recommend continued development of them, but we think they are not ready for inclusion in the package that's coming up. We received a presentation from the team that did the management strategy evaluation, and we encourage the continued use of management strategy evaluation to assess the performance of the proposed framework and addenda. We think that the MSC provides a strong foundation from which to begin an assessment of how these different methods will perform, but it does not at the moment allow you to be sure regarding the performance of any one of those measures. The MSC considers only a single species. It uses an approximation of the recreational demand model, and it starts that single species in one stock status. So it is not a comprehensive analysis. It does indicate that there is a trade-off between the number of bins, these discrete boxes in the control process that you've been shown, and the multipliers of change that occur between the bins. So are you liberalizing by 10% or 20%? Are you reducing by 10% or 20%? In some of the proposed control processes, the multipliers appeared to be insufficient in size to afford the control process the ability to control the system we're trying to look at. And the last slide, we do think that the management strategy evaluation should be continued. We think it is an important tool to assessing the performance of these alternative proposals. We also caution that one of the current limitations of the MSC is that it considers how these proposed framework and addenda will perform when you use only one regulatory tool. You use either bag limits or size limits or season lengths. There is not built into the MSC the ability to use multiple tools to regulate the fishery. One of the lessons from the MSC was that things like bag limit and to an extent season limit were somewhat ineffective in controlling those efforts, but their use in combination remains unevaluated. So with that, I thank you, and I'll be happy to address any questions either now or at the end.
Thanks, Tom. I think we're going to finish off with a timeline, and then we'll take questions for both your presentation and what we've presented on today. So very briefly, timeline and next steps. Between now and October, when the policy board and council will be approving the final range of alternatives and the draft addenda for public comment, the FMAP PDT is going to be working on completing development of the alternatives and consider and finish evaluating the issues that we are directed to, and we will finish drafting that document. And after October 2024, between November and February, we will be putting together and holding the public comment period and public hearings. And in March 2025, the FMAP PDT and AP will meet to review public comments and provide any input prior to final action, which will occur in April 2025, where the Council and Policy Board will review all the public comments, the recommendations from the FMAP, PDT, and AP, and they will approve the framework addenda for implementation. Then after that, up until late 2025, we will be working to finalize the framework addenda documents, and Garfield on their end will be going through the federal rulemaking process. This is all leading to an effective date of late 2025, early 2026, with the goal of using this, whatever comes of this framework addenda, to set management measures in 2026. So with that, I think we can take any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for our panel? Adam Nowalski.
So you have to forgive me kind of shooting from the hip since, you know, I haven't been involved in any of this here. So we're going to try to do the best I can here. I think there's a very important conversation we need to have very soon. Hopefully leadership can help with this, about the intent of this action and the action that preceded it with the percent change approach, with regards to this idea that we're trying to not manage to an RHL, but instead to some other target. I understand that on a single run of implementation, that may be the end result. But the whole purpose of the recreational management reform was to achieve a healthy resource in conjunction with more stability in measures that kept us from chasing a number that was largely driven by recreational estimates that had very high variability, i.e. the RHL. So for the last year or so, we've been throwing around this idea that we're not managing to the RHL, but the whole goal of the percent change approach was to achieve the middle row of that management matrix, whereby we had a healthy resource around the target and would have little change in measures. We'd be around the RHL and not have to change measures a whole lot. And I see heads nodding around here. So the concept is really to manage to the RHL over this longer period of time for the benefit of the resource and to go ahead and have stability of measures. I now hear, you know, the SSC making specific comments here that we're not managing to the RHL. And I'm very concerned because that was not the intent of this action. That's not where we're trying to go with this revision. So I'm wondering what we can get at this point from leadership and staff to try to set this ship on the straight and narrow path that conveys what the intent of this action is, what we're trying to do, and hopefully ultimately takes away from some of the discussions we're having about the negatives of what we're trying to do with recreational management, i.e. skirt and RHL, which is not what we're trying to do. So I'd really appreciate some guidance here on how we can address this. If somebody thinks I'm completely wrong with what the intent and what we're trying to do here, please speak up. But I think this is really important because it's really going to frame this discussion as we move forward in this room, as we take documents out for public hearing. So I'm hoping we can address this sooner versus later.
Julia, would you like to have first stab at that?
No, I think maybe that could be a council and policy board discussion. Chelsea was just reminding me of the goal statement slide that was shown previously that came from the previous action. I could read it out loud again, but it's focusing on preventing overfishing, reflective of stock status, appropriately accounts for uncertainty in the recreational data, takes into consideration angler preferences, and provides an appropriate level of stability and predictability and changes from year to year. Also thinking that some of the alternatives have more of a focus on the RHL or the ACL than others. Or the ACL are part of all the alternatives that the FMAT and PDT are recommending maintaining in there, but specifically with the biomass-based matrix approach, it's some sections of it have it's less of a reliance on it than others. So maybe it would help to have more clarity from the Council and Policy Board on if do the alternatives need to change to make that more clear, or is it just something about how to think about the alternatives as they are, and if there's a desire to have a different goal statement for this action, it would be helpful to have that clarified, and we'll need to put it in the draft addenda that will be approved in October to go out to public comment. So if any of that needs to be clarified, it would be good to have that discussion so we can make sure that it's something that we're working on and putting in the draft document that'll come before you all in October.
Adam?
So if you're looking for me to solve that equation, I would say this would be a great thing to add to the document in text. I would support the FMAT PDT working with the subgroup of council members and commissioners that are already working with the FMAT PDT to help craft that language to make sure that this is framed correctly for our continued communication to all parties that are involved in the review of the alternatives. That's my attempt at solving that equation.
Tom?
So I accept, Adam, your point that the goal is to have the fishery in this happy place. I think the SSE's concern is what happens when it is perturbed from that happy place. Is the package, is the control process sufficient to bring it back? When the response is not the difference from the RHL, but a particular change in recreational harvest. That becomes the key point. Not that we doubt the global intent, but it is a question of whether the control process that is developed has the ability to return the system to the place that you want it to be. And it would be like saying, I want the room temperature at 72 degrees, but the thermostat is only going to be able to control the temperature by 2 degrees. Well, if you've got a lot of hot air coming into the room, 2 degrees may not be enough to bring it back to where you want it to be. And so that's the principal SSE concern.
Megan Ware?
Thank you. I'm curious on the biomass-based matrix, if there's been a conversation on what defines a trend, either in terms of number of years of data or the magnitude of change?
Yes, I actually, I'm not sure if it's in the briefing materials for this meeting, but we have it in other documents that there is a specific method proposed using I think it's the most recent 3-year average of biomass estimates from the stock assessment. And if it meets a certain threshold percentage change on average over the moving 3-year average, it would be classified as increasing, stable, or decreasing. That is something that the SSC recommended thinking about that a little harder in terms of is that the best way to do it? So the FMAT and PDT might evaluate that a little further if it's prioritized, if we have time, given everything else that we need to get done over the next month or so. But there is a specific method proposed right now, and it's based on a moving 3-year average from the stock assessment.
Great. Thanks, Julia.
Jeff Kalen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if this question is for Tracy or Julia or Dr. Miller, but I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the development of the F-based approaches and how further development could benefit this process and the kinds of outcomes that we've just been talking about. How could F-based approaches improve the certainty around the outcome, and what kind of data and analysis would have to be available in order to use an F-based approach? It seems like it's got legs, but needs some more work, and I'm just curious how you get to the goal line on that issue.
Thank you, Jeff. I think the first observation to be made is that the principal method that was brought forward was developed just for Scup, and there was no consideration about how that method would work with other species. There were some challenges with Scup when the analysts brought it forward of trying to achieve the FMP goal of the stated allocation between recreational and commercial harvest that required some ad hoc adjustments to get the system to work. So I think at a first level, a broader evaluation of the approach related to the other species. The second point I would make is that if we think of the ability to control fisheries as part of this idea of a control process, the F-based approach specifies one of the incoming observations as being the F out of the stock assessment. And the reliability of terminal F estimates in stock assessments, the same as terminal biomass estimates in stock assessments, is highly uncertain. And how that uncertainty affects the management decision process would be an important component to bring forward. But if those problems could be overcome, the F-based approaches present an integrated, holistic approach under which both commercial and recreational fisheries could be managed. So there is great potential for this. It is just very early days.
Thank you.
Joe Semino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom, I guess this question is for you. Looking at that comment that the biology of these species is somewhat different, it goes back to your response to Adam as well. There are species, I think of cobia in the Chesapeake Bay, where there's hyperstability. It's shooting fish in a barrel. Even if those populations are going down and down, you could still have high harvest. I don't think we're seeing that with any of these 4 species. I think that we see that as the stocks go down, they're harder to find. We actually are in situations where we find ourselves talking about liberalizing for bad stocks, but ratcheting down on the stocks that are doing very well. So I guess the question is, the SSC, or perhaps just the subgroup that has really looked into this, is there a concern that there's enough difference in these 4 species that they should be broken apart and handled differently? Or do you feel that the way they respond to the fisheries, to the recreational catch is enough that we can consider all these together still?
So the first answer I would give to that question is we don't know, because the MSC has only been done for one of the 4. So one of the recommendations would be that MSCs for all 4 species should be taken. The other point in answer to the question is that the allocation between commercial and recreational fisheries for the 4 species is substantially different, going from sort of 40-60 to 90-10-ish. And the way commercial and recreational fisheries are managed is fundamentally different. The output controls versus input controls, and the reliability of the data coming out of those fisheries is fundamentally different. So I think given the range of both the types of fisheries, the range of the responses of these species that we've observed to things like climate change, means that I think we have some concerns over whether a single process is the best way forward. We're not saying that there is definitive evidence that it's not. We're just cautioning that the degree of differences between these four species is substantial.
Tony Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to have the board circle back to Adam's question, because I don't think that there's clarity for staff exactly on what the resolution is. And I don't disagree with Adam in his characterization of the original intent when we first started talking about this document, but it's not clear to us if the board wants to clarify this goal language, or do we want to change the goal it is as it's identified in the document? And I do think we need to have some further discussion so that they can get us a document at the commission's meeting in October.
Wes, you want me to cover?
We're trying to pull up the goal statement on the screen right now, if that's helpful.
Yeah, Wes and I didn't, I guess we didn't do an introduction, but I apologize, I didn't move up to the front of the table, but as the current chair of the commission, I'm also the chair of the policy board. So since this is a question to the board, I will look to the board to see thoughts and if there's any interest in just doing exactly that, moving forward as a clarification, or if we're actually looking to, kind of pivot here. And also, Tony, I'll look to you for, well, hands online. Adam?
I'll just reiterate what I suggested earlier, that I think this is something that the council commissioner work group can go back and work with the FMAP PDT on and develop. My original suggestion was that it be just drafted as language, but I do think the element of specifically having that group work with the FMAT and PDT to check if language is sufficient, but also look at these goals and decide if it needs to be more clearly spelled out here. I think that's a reasonable thing for both places to look at. Add language to the document and consider whether revising the goal statement to match that language is appropriate. I would support that approach, again, having that work group work with the FMAP PDT to develop that.
Thanks, Adam. And I'll look to Wes for a head nod. Since this work group is rather unique and a joint venture, I would just look for objections. And if you're okay with that, if we don't see any objections, then we'll, if you're okay with us looking to both the council and commission to see if there's any objections, and if not, then we could move forward with that. All right, Chris?
All right, Chris Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a question for Julia. So considering that this is another potential couple of meetings, how does it affect the timeline? Because we're on a very tight timeline that basically takes us to an endpoint in April of 25, right? So what do you think?
I can take that. Thank you. So I think that it doesn't impact the timeline, but I don't know how much time there is to have multiple meetings between FMAP PDT and the work group to really craft this language. I think we can definitely get a meeting in to focus on this and really dive deep, but we're going to have to come to that meeting prepared with language drafted for everyone to review and kind of pick apart at that meeting. But for those that are not on the commissioner and council member work group, if you have advice, if the meetings are open to the public, you're welcome to attend, but it would also be helpful to know as much as we can today so that we can draft a document that has, that is substantial and explains things well to you all to approve so that it can be approved in October, because we do have a pretty quick turnaround to get that document submitted for meeting materials. I don't hope that answers your question.
Chris?
Yeah, thank you. The other thing is that, you don't see RHL mentioned here. And to Adam's very specific focus, that's where we need to really communicate, develop our messages around, right? Because it's an ongoing issue, as Adam clearly articulated earlier. So as this working group meets and starts thinking about the messaging, RHL is going to have to appear somewhere, right? And so certainly, hopefully that'll happen. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, well, I mean, I just want to stress the importance of the timeline here more than anything. And I guess, not too pointedly, but, to Adam, is the thought here that this is more of a reconfirmation or a pivot? Because if it's a reconfirmation, and I guess, it does bear some discussion around, does this have to bring in the actual wording of the RHL or not? But I guess a pivot is probably something that is going to change the timeline. And so we need to have that discussion perhaps separately than just kind of clarifying where we're going with this as maybe the PDT and the work group meet together.
Adam?
To me, this is a 100% reconfirmation. This is not a pivot in any way. Going back to work that Bob Ballou started as chair of this board 2018-ish, that was the intent. Again, we were trying not to, the specific words were stop chasing the RHL. The language was not throw the RHL out. The language was not forget the RHL exists. The language was to stop chasing it. And somehow, again, and I understand where those concerns are coming from, and I'm not saying that the impacts, that those concerns are not valid. I've just heard the messaging now. I'm hearing it get into other conversations. I've specifically, as a council member, had previously expressed my concerns about the administrative record that was being created about these conversations to the executive director. And as we now prepare a document to go out to the public, I'm just at a point where I just feel we need to make it very clear at this point. So we're not having these, we're taking up time at FMAP PDT meetings. We're taking up time with the SSC having these conversations about something that was not the intent of the message. That was a lot of words. Let me just go back to 100% reconfirmation and stop there.
Tracy?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to also note, in terms of the timeline, that might help everyone frame this as well, that I think it's around October 7th that the draft addendum framework for public comment would need to be completed to be included in, well, to be included in the initial deadline for meeting materials. And we want to have the board and council have enough time to look through it thoroughly. So around October 7th is sort of when we need to have it complete, essentially.
Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I mean, just to kind of build on Adam's point, which I agree with, the recreational harvest limit will continue to exist, will continue to be set through the specifications process. We talked a lot today for black sea bass and for scup and summer flounder. We have set recreational harvest limits. The issue was the chasing of that RHL, and it was chasing it with a point estimate of recreational harvest. And the challenge was trying to adjust measures to ensure that that point estimate of recreational harvest was at or below the point of the recreational harvest limit. And I think for all of the benefits and strengths of MRIP, of which there are several, there are still some limitations of MRIP. The estimates of harvest can be uncertain for certain species. They can be driven by rare events. And so what we don't really have is a ton of confidence in a single point estimate from MRIP that represents recreational harvest, similar to what we have on the commercial side, where we have a fairly high degree of confidence in what the landings were for the commercial side. So it's much easier to track landings against a quota. So when we started this process several years ago, the idea was to avoid chasing the RHL with a point estimate and being driven by that point estimate to make significant, in some cases, substantial changes to the recreational measures, and to reflect that when recreational fishing is having an impact, we make an adjustment. And that's what, the harvest control rule process, I think, has set us up for. And if you look at the percent change approach that we're currently implementing and is suggested as continued in the framework adjustment, the reference to the RHL appears something like 6 or 7 times. So we're still using the RHL, but we are recognizing that there's a lot of variability, uncertainty around the point estimate associated with the MRIP estimate of recreational harvest. And so trying to reconcile those two things into a process that people can understand, people can sort of somewhat predict what might happen next year, and that gives us a little bit more flexibility to make decisions about what the recreational measures need to do in the future. So I agree with Adam. I think we have a good system here. I'm very concerned about the timeline. I'm very concerned about the expectations on the FMAT and the PDT for getting the work done that we've set for them. I think they've suggested some things that we could drop from the framework addenda to ensure that we can meet the timeline. I think that should be what we hold paramount, is ensuring that we have a reasonable workload for the team that's preparing the documents so that we can complete the work that we need to do according to the timeline. Thanks.
Any more comments around the table? Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to comment on the FMAT PDT recommendation to remove the revised starting point issue. And I understand and accept that there's not time for further development of that, and support the recommendations to narrow the scope here and stick to the timeline. I just want to say that that doesn't come without some disappointment on my behalf. Not only was that brought up to kind of address the perception that the measures don't match abundance, but also to address some of what I perceive as inequity in the measures at this time. And so while it doesn't look like we're going to be addressing that through this part of the recreational setting process, I think and hope that there's still room within the commission's process, the next step of actually setting the measures where we can continue to focus some effort and attention on equity of measures between the states. Thanks.
Emerson Hasbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what I'm wondering is, have all the SSC comments been addressed and incorporated into the document? I know that the F-based approaches have been removed, and there were numerous comments about the F-based approaches, but they've been removed. So are there still SSC comments that may need to be addressed for the 3 remaining options? And if so, how is that process going to take place? Thank you.
Chelsea?
Thank you, Emerson. So I think, like you said, some of the SSC comments have been addressed, like the F-based approaches and the dropping of the biological reference point approach. Because we do not, we have the memo that was sent out as part of these meeting materials, but we do not have a draft addendum document yet. So what is addressed in there is to be determined. The FMAP PDT has reviewed the SSC report and has responded to the comments, but what that response looks like in the form of document, I think, is still to be determined. And Julie, I don't know if you have any additions there.
Yeah, I think just that we're not really approaching it like it's a requirement to address every single point in the SSE report. I think the report was really helpful and really valuable, but we weren't necessarily approaching it that way. Like, we'll do what we can with the time remaining. But there's some things in there that we're just not going to be able to address, but we don't see that as like a fatal flaw in the action. It wasn't ever intended to be something like we need to check all of these boxes before we can move forward.
Well, follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Well, maybe I've been under a different impression. When we originally asked the SSC to review this back, I guess, 2 years ago, my impression was that the council and the commission were going to consider all of the comments that the SSC provided and maybe accept some of those comments or not accept some of those comments. But for the ones that we don't accept, there would be an explanation as to why. Sounds to me like it's just kind of a random process here now where, well, some of the ones we like, we'll address. Some of the ones we don't like, we won't address without any reasoning as to why we're not looking at all of the comments from the SSC. So I don't know if other people have a similar impression, but that was my impression. Was that, we didn't ask the SSC to go through this process so that we can just arbitrarily pick and choose which comments we want to consider. Thank you.
Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I don't think that the PDT is arbitrarily choosing to respond to some of the SSC's concern versus others. I think they are taking into consideration the comments that were made and to the best of their ability are responding to them within the options in the document. And if the board and the council are not satisfied with the alternatives that the PDT puts together for your review in October, you can provide direction to them and how to change it. If there's something specific in the SSC's comments that you would like to have worked into the alternatives, then I would highly recommend reaching out to the PDT members and give them very specific direction of what you would like to see in those alternatives, because again, we are in a tight time frame, and provide that direction to them and how you'd like to see that comment addressed and the alternative revised. And then just as a second to Nicola's comments before about achieving or looking at the starting measures, I think we can have the technical committee perhaps as a start, try to do some evaluation and come up with something over the course of maybe the next year. Or we'll try to see if we could do it a little sooner, but Chelsea could talk about it, but we can do that through our process and bring it back. And depending on what they suggest, we may or may not need a management document to implement something.
Tom or Chelsea, whoever wants to go first.
Mine is very quick, just on Tony's comment just there, Nicola. I think it'll be a lot easier too for the technical committee once that RDM tool, cloud tool is up and running again for us to look at the starting point for measures. So we can do that come fall once that tool gets back up online.
So I'm not sure the SSE would feel Emerson's comment is particularly fair, that the response has been arbitrary about choosing which ones to listen to and which ones not. I think there were some SSE comments, though I think important, perhaps would derail the process entirely, right? So you have an MSC for just one species. You are going to take it on faith that the other species will respond to the framework in the same way, because there is simply not sufficient time to develop an MSC for the other species in the time frame for, when is it, October the 7th or whenever it is. The time to have made that decision was in 2019 and 2020 and have resourced those efforts to allow to do it. I think you've seen very clear responses from the FMAT and PDT in dropping options based upon SEC review comments. So I don't think there has been an arbitrary response. I think the SSC would say the most important aspects that have not been considered and have not been presented in front of you today was consideration of how the data are going to be handled that feed into that table. So I will say that I think a 3-year moving average with a 5% threshold, which is what's being proposed, is inadequate to detect a trend. And there hasn't been the analysis behind that to show that it is or isn't. So if the FMAT and PDT want to prioritize areas that they should respond to, then the handling of the observations becomes important, because I think they have done a sincere effort to respond to our comments regarding the control process. I haven't yet seen evidence that the comments about the observations have yet been responded to in the same comprehensive way.
Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess, I just wanted to thank the SSC subgroup for all of their efforts here. And Tom, to you for coming to present this to us and be here and available for comments. I know it's been a bit of a difficult task. And I think, the report is going to provide, direction for the FMAT PDT as they continue to move forward and, consider recreational management approaches in out years. I mean, I don't think this is a process that is like one and done, even with, with this amendment or the framework that we have before us that we're going to be considering in October. So I think the SSC's feedback on this is going to continue to be useful as the FMAT PDT and as the council and commission, consider recreational management down the road. So, as someone who has not been able to attend, or listen to all of the FMAT PDT discussions on this, it was really helpful for me to read this report and go back and cross-reference some of those meeting summaries. So thank you. I think it's been very valuable.
Adam.
A brief build on Nicola's comment about the consideration of a revision to the starting point of measures. I certainly share her disappointment, but certainly understand. What I did want to raise was that the meeting materials staff memo for this conversation read for the starting point of measures not recommended for inclusion in this action, but the slide today said considered but rejected. Those to me are two very different phrases with two very different meanings about what we do moving forward. I am unhappy, but accept not recommended for inclusion in this action. I do not accept considered but rejected moving forward. So maybe that's just a matter of semantics, but I would like to be able to keep that ball up in the air as we look forward to finding some way to consider that moving forward.
Julia?
Just to clarify that considered but rejected is NEPA language. And when I was thinking about it, we use that, I think the slide used that language for the F-based approaches too, but it's the same thing, like just for purposes, like in our NEPA documents, you know, this alternative, or in this case, it wasn't a specific alternative, but this was considered, but it was not, you know, I think that's what we meant, like not, don't include it in this action, but rejected doesn't have to mean it's like totally dead forever, that it could be further pursued through separate avenues. So I just want to clarify that considered but rejected is a NEPA term for a specific document analyzing a specific action, that, you know, that's why we use the language in the memo, that it doesn't quite sound as harsh, that we can, if the council and policy board want to prioritize some of those things through separate actions, that's not gonna slow down this, that can still be done even if it's rejected from this specific action.
Any more comments around the table? Go to the audience, Mike Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Wayne with the American Sport Fishing Association. Most of my questions got resolved through the discussion, but one specifically that I had was actually on this goal statement. The first bullet reads, prevent overfishing. And so my question to staff is, through the development of the alternatives, is there consideration that the accountability measures would be based on an evaluation of overfishing using what was using realized fishing mortality from the most recent stock assessment? I think there's been some discussion of moving in that direction, and the reason to support that is the frequency of stock assessments that we have to conduct that evaluation on the time frame that it would be needed to be conducted to actually do accountability. And so I just wanted to check back in on the progress of that to make sure I'm understanding that that's still included as a focal point of this action.
Julia?
So we haven't talked about the AMs in great detail yet for this action, except to repeatedly say, like, it'll be really important to think about how AMs play into this, but that's something that we do plan to have some FMAT and PDT discussions of over, you know, between now and October 7th, so that that could play into it. I think we'll start with, like, these are the current AMs. Do they still fit in with this alternative? Do they need to be changed? And considerations of things like that could be part of it. You know, you described it as based on the most recent stock assessment information. I think that's doable. And to me, that's different than like the other F-based approaches that we were considering projecting into the future. But looking at the most recent information from the most recent prior years from the assessment in terms of if overfishing was occurring, I think that's something that could be considered through the AMs. But just in general, the AMs are discussions that we will have in the next month or so. So to be determined what the specific outcome will be.
Thanks for that. I'll look forward to seeing how that progresses over the next several months. And then kind of taking a step back here, this continues to be a pretty complex management action. And so I just want to flag for staff thinking through how best to engage the stakeholders on this. It seems as though there's unlikely to be kind of a protracted public comment period for this action. And it seems to be falling in line with, other framework actions in terms of timing. And so I'm just looking at the complexity of this action and trying to reconcile that with a short public comment period and how best to kind of engage the stakeholders in this. Of course, as a player and a stakeholder in this action, we will do our best to assist with that. But perhaps there's opportunity at the state level to get folks more engaged earlier to help wade through some of the complexities that exist here. So just wanted to lay that out as we kind of move forward into the next phase of this action. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Greg?
Greg DiDomenico, Lunds Fisheries. Just a few questions, maybe for staff, maybe for leadership. I'm struggling with what I think Adam was struggling with and other people. So I think I've not missed one FMAT or PDT meeting, and I've heard one recurring theme, which is we're no longer aiming for the RHL. We're no longer managing for the RHL. Am I wrong? Did we just resolve that, or am I going to wait for your next objective or iteration of the framework to clarify that?
Joey?
I've said that at multiple FMET and PET meetings. I said it earlier today in the Black Sea Bass specs presentation. For the percent change approach and the modified percent change approach, the RHL is still part of the decision make. It's part of how we determine what we are aiming for. And I also said earlier today that it's more of taking an incremental approach to getting harvests in line with the RHL. So for those alternatives, it's still part of it. It's just not, we're not trying to pinpoint the RHL specifically. So just to clarify my comments regarding that.
Okay. Other question was even though there'll be a limited amount of public hearings on this, or at least there'll be some, will you be able to offer the public the corresponding bag size and season that would be resulted for the alternatives?
I can answer that. So the alternatives determine how we are going to set measures. They don't determine what the measures themselves are going to be. That is something that happens through the commission process later on. So we will not have example measures associated with each of the alternatives.
I would prepare for every person at that meeting to ask you that. And then lastly, maybe to leadership, I'm trying not to be funny here, but is this the recreational reform initiative, or am I lost? Because I'm reading the goal statement and I don't think they're that much dissimilar.
Julia?
So the recreational reform initiative, when did it start? Several years ago, was like a broader, it started out as a broader initiative, and then it has turned into a few specific management actions. So this is a specific framework and addenda that fits under the broader umbrella of the recreational reform initiative.
Okay, then I guess that explains why the objectives are fairly similar. Okay. I know there was one other, but I'm not gonna. Can't think of it now, and I'm not gonna waste any more of your time. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in for a second and steal a phrase from Tom Miller on getting derailed a little bit. I had a question before, I believe, the council and commission on it's obvious there's more work that's going to be going on. We do intend to pull up a motion because there are certain, specifically the removal of some options that we hopefully have all recognized, have met their lifespan for this particular point in time. But going back to Tony's concern that we need some clarity, I was asking if there was any objection to having that happen in the same time frame as so a working group meeting that brings about some clarity for the goals in the same time frame as the other work that's going to be proceeding. And I'd look to all hands, actually, including staff and Garfo, on if there are any concerns with doing that as we move forward with the motion that we'll be bringing up shortly.
Tracy, did you want to weigh in?
My comment was more towards the public comments for overfishing. Sorry, it's hard to jump in here being remote.
Would you like to add them now, or you good?
I was just going to add or note for the record that the modified biomass-based matrix approach now incorporates overfishing, so that if overfishing is occurring, we'd not use the table and we would be looking at meeting the ACL. At least that's how it's written right now. So stuff like the RHL overfishing in that alternative is also considered.
Alrighty, thank you. Julia, I believe you have a motion that can be put up.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it on the slide here, but Stephen will pull up the Word document. It's just to approve the draft range of alternatives as presented today. And again, it's just the draft range. Really, what will really most help us move forward is, getting the signal from you all that you're okay with us stopping working on the things that we're recommending that we not include in this action, so that we can focus on the remaining things. I don't know if, Chelsea, do you want to weigh in on the council versus board aspect of this motion?
Yes, and Tony and Bob can correct me if I'm wrong here, but we do not need a motion from the board until October when we approve a draft document. So this will be a council only motion.
Unless a board member has a problem with removing one of the options, then we should have a motion to bring that option back.
Yeah, Chris and I were talking. I mean, then it might just be cleaner to have this be a motion from both council and board. And so I think it's fair enough to.
We don't have range of alternatives in a commission document.
Okay. So we'll look for objections after this. Thank you.
Would anybody like to make this motion on behalf of the council? Mike Penny? Anybody like to second it? Okay, Ken Neal? Mike, would you like to add any rationale?
Yeah, I just want to thank the work that the PDTF did. I think, there's been a lot of progress. I think the work to improve the percent change approach from the original, the refinements that were done to the biomass-based approach, recognizing the workload associated with the other alternatives, the recommendations to not address those fully in this action, I think makes sense given the timeline. I think there's been a lot of good thought, a lot of good progress to try to move the needle forward in terms of how we address the challenges of managing the recreational fishery. So I made the motion to keep us moving forward with this and hope that the board will engaged with its process so that we can come back and take final action as planned. Thanks.
Cam, would you like to add anything? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Any abstentions on the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously.
All right, and since this is slightly different than how we handle certain other things, I will look to the board to see if there are any concerns with how we are moving forward here, or if hopefully we can stay in lockstep and continue this process. Thanks.
All right, Julian, anything else to bring before us? Good to go? All right, with that, let's just take a 10-minute break before we come back to the Bluefish. Come back at 4:05. Welcome back, everyone. Let's start with our last joint agenda item for the day. The 2025 Bluefish specifications. Jose and Chelsea, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So as you indicated, today we're going to be reviewing the 2025 specifications for Bluefish. Yes. So basically, we're going to follow a similar review as done for some of the other species. I'm going to hit some of the same components. And basically, as I said before, you're going to review the catch and landings limits that were previously adopted for 2025 and changes to other management measures. You're going to consider that if needed as well. So in 2023, the council set specifications for 2024 and 2025. So we're in the first year of the current 2-year specifications cycle. In addition, we are on the 3rd year of a 7-year rebuilding plan that started in 2022. The 2025 management track assessment results will be used to develop the next the specifications cycle for 2026 and 2027. So we'll be doing that next year. This table basically shows what the current management measures are for 2024 and what we have in the books for 2025. On the top, you can see that the ABC for 2024 is 17.48 million pounds. That is increasing to 21.83 million pounds for 2025. Then we have all the deductions for management uncertainty and commercial and recreational discards. And the bottom line there is that we have a commercial quota right now of 2.42 million pounds, and that increases to 3.03 million pounds in 2025. And the recreational harvest limit for 2025 is 15.70 million pounds, an increase from the 11.96 million pounds that we have currently for 2024. So the last stock assessment was a management track assessment that was conducted in 2023 that included data through 2022. It indicated that the stock is not overfished. We're about 60% of the biomass target, and overfishing is not occurring. We're about 64% of the overfishing threshold. However, we're not fully rebuilt to the biomass target reference point, and that's what we're trying to do through this rebuilding schedule that we have right now. So on the left, you have spawning stock biomass, and you can see there you can see that the biomass just recently crossed over positive territory on that bottom line. And we are, under the rebuilding schedule, we're supposed to reach that second line on the top. So we're on our way there. We're 60% away from that point. In the middle, you have fishing mortality, and you can see that fishing mortality has gone down. Fishing mortality has gone down for the last few years, probably a result of the lower bag limits and also the fact that commercial and recreational landings have been decreasing for the last 5 or 6 years or so. So fish availability also has probably an important part on this fishing mortality going down. On the right, you have recruits, and you can see that recruitment has increased each year since 2019. And in the terminal year 2022, it was about 137 million fish, and that's the highest value since 2005. Now, these recruitment estimates are highly uncertain. As I understand it, is the most uncertain output from the model. And it is also important to notice that this increase in recruits can influence the increase in biomass in the ABC from 2024 to 2025 in the projections. So this is a very uncertain parameter. To put what I just said in better context, this is a statement that comes out of the 2023 Management Track Assessment. This is one of the terms of reference. I'm not going to read this because it's long, but I want you to read it so you can kind of, I just want to put what I just said into better context. And the term of reference says, provide qualitative statements describing the condition of the stock related to the stock status. So I'm going to give you a minute to read this on the next slide. Well, that's more than a minute. So basically, this is just describing how fisher mortality has gone down and what are some of the factors that have been impacted that fisher mortality and how recruits are being considered here too as well. So in addition to the stock assessment, management track assessment, we just recently got a data update from the center as well. And this data update included updated discards and landings for both the commercial and the recreational fishery, and also included recreational catch per unit effort indices. The first one is the MRIP index, and you can see that that index stayed flat from 2022 to 2023 at a 0.708 value. We will have expected that index to go up given the amount of that large recruit class in 2022, but you don't see that here. The index is just completely flat. I reached out to Tony Wood. He's the stock assessment lead for Bluefish at the Northeast Fishery Science Center. So I asked him his take on this value staying flat. And basically he said that he couldn't speak to why it remained flat. There are a lot of variables that go into calculating this specific index under the new GILT approach. So there are too many variables that go into that, and it's difficult to find out, to ascertain what is going on. But he was also expecting that value to go up. He indicated that maybe we will see a bump in recruitment in 2024 or when the next assessment is conducted, or maybe the 2023 index will adjust. So we just don't know what's going on here. But to me, this is a red flag that indicates that something is happening to those recruits. They're not being captured in this index. Then we have the Northeast Fishery Science Center Fall Survey. That one increased from 3.13 to 4.02 from 22 to 23. I asked Tony if this range of values were something significant, and he says that they are within the observed ranges for this index. So there's nothing special here with this increase. And also, we have to keep in mind that the Northeast Fisheries Science Center survey, fall survey, is not really a good sampler of bluefish. Finally, here we have a table that was provided by Tony, that a figure that shows landings. Hard to see in this, but at the end you can see that landings overall catch has decreased in the last few years, 4 or 5 years, downward trend there. Regarding quotas and recreational harvest limits and landings for 2023, the commercial landings were 2.67 million pounds, or about 62% of the quota of 4.29 million pounds. Now you can see that landings there in 2023 increased a little bit increased some from 2022. Regarding the recreational fishery, landings came in at 11.08 million pounds, or about 80% of the quota for 2023, and it was a decrease from the prior year. It went from 11.35 to 11.08 million pounds, the recreational landings. 2023 recreational landings by state are shown on this table. The top harvester states were New York, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Florida. Recreational harvest, these are proportions by state. These are proportions of harvested fish versus released fish by state. Again, the top harvesters were Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina, and Florida. Recreational harvest by mode in 2023, the for hire mode landed 7% of the, or harvested 7% of all the fish. Private rental 43%, and shore 51%. Very small change from what we saw the prior year. Regarding the commercial fishery, in 2023, 2.67 million pounds were landed. You have landings there on the left by state. The value of those landings was about $1.5 million, and the price per pound was 0.55 cents. It went down from the prior year, from about a little bit over 80 cents per pound to about 55 cents per pound in 2023. Landings by statistical area are on the top. These are statistical areas that accounted for 5% or more of the landings. Then we have landings by port in the bottom. Those are ports that landed 100,000 or more pounds of talfish. We have like about 7 ports there. The bulk of the ports are in North Carolina. We have also ports in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York. 64% of the landings came from gillnet and 17% from handline gear. This is Garfo's from Garfo's weekly quota monitoring. These are commercial landings for 2024 in the blue line. So we're trailing behind the landings from last year at the same time period. About 1 million pounds have been landed thus far as of last week, or about 41% of the quota. Now, moving into the fishery performance report, there is a lot more information that what I'm giving you here in the document. They made early this year to develop this report. So I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. They indicated regarding environmental factors and things that are influencing the catch. They indicated that there is a high variability in the distribution of large fish. There is a lot of patchiness and driven by prey availability. They indicated that they have a lot of difficulty prognosticating when the fish will be around. They're not coming in at the same time periods that they typically come in, or not showing at all. There is a concern over the removal of important prey forage species by the commercial Manhattan fishery. They indicated that bluefish diet research studies are needed. I don't think that they were really, I was not at that meeting, but in reading the report, I don't think it has to do with, like, we don't have enough information about bluefish diet. I think that it's more like what is going on right now. Where are the prey species? Well, you know, how can we better understand how diets are affecting the way bluefish are showing up or not showing up now? They also indicated that bluefish trips are hard to define. A lot of time people just go out fishing for other species, but if they catch bluefish, then that turns into a bluefish trip. Regarding market and environmental, 1 second. Okay, regarding market and economic and management issues, AP members from New York indicated that bluefish are very important to the party boats there. Larger fish are money makers, and they would like to see an increase in the bag limit. Regarding research priorities, there was a comment that we better need to understand or track climate change and recruit patterns in the southern end of the range, and then kind of understand how that transfers along the coast as the fish move up north. They also indicated that MRIP is not accurately capturing the fishery. There was a specific comment that there were a lot of catch and release data that came from New York. They said that it was not something common. It was not that it was impossible, but they indicated that it will be good to validate those catch and release estimates. So the SSC met about a week and a half ago or so, and they recommended no changes to the previously set ABCs for 2025. Those ABCs are shown there, and those were calculated with an CV of 100% around the OFL. And they also took into consideration this 7-year rebuilding program F target that is driving these calculations. They indicated that available evidence did not support changes in the 2025 ABC. The SSC also commented that the 23 management track assessment indicated that the stock was not overfished nor overfishing occurring, as I indicated before, and that bluefish are in a 3rd year of a 7-year rebuilding program based on an F rebuild of 0.183. And basically, after reviewing all the available and new information on stock indices, catches, and fishery performance, the SSC recommended continuation of the previously recommended ABC for 2025. There was a staff memo to Chris Moore in your package with staff recommendations. The staff recommendation was to maintain the previously implemented ABC for 2025. The basis for this was that the Northeast Fishery Science Center data update did not show major shift compared to the previous understanding of the stock dynamics and the recent fishery performance. The staff recommendation also recommended to maintain the previously implemented quota and recreational harvest limit, and also the recreational back limits that were implemented a year ago. Staff also commented that the 2025 management track assessment may result in liberalizations or restrictions to recreational management measures. And because of this, recommending changes to recreational measures might be more appropriate with the update stock information that is going to be available next year. And we also staff commented on the stability of the measures, how important they are while rebuilding the stock. The monitoring committee met on August 2nd, and the monitoring committee and the technical committee, they review all the information that was available, the data update, the fishery performance, the SSC recommendations, and the staff recommendations. The monitoring committee also reviewed management uncertainty, They noted that the discards estimates have improved in this fishery greatly compared to prior years. And there was a discussion about the uncertainty tool that is being developed by the Monitoring Committee and Technical Committee. And there are going to be further discussions in 2025 to keep on refining that tool and also assess how that tool can be used to during the 2026-2027 specifications cycle. So you will be hearing more about this in the future. The Monitoring Committee recommended no changes to the previously implemented catch and landings limits for 2025, as recommended by staff, and they recommended no changes to the recreational bag limits of 3 fish for private or shore modes and 5 fish for the for-hire mode. The Monitoring Committee review recent recreational fishery performance, and they noted that the 2025 recreational ACT of 18.78 million pounds is higher than the projected removals for 2025. And they also commented that the 2025 recreational harvest limit of 15.70 million pounds is higher than the realized landings for 2022 and 2023. So there was quite a bit of discussion regarding this. However, they recommended to maintain the bag limit given all these different factors here. The Monitoring Committee and Technical Committee indicated that maintaining current bag limits will contribute to the management stability. While the stock is not overfished or overfishing is occurring, the rebuilding plan needs to achieve a biomass equal to the biomass target. Remember, I showed you that figure that we're still 60% off that target, and we're on the 3rd year already of a 7-year rebuilding plan. They also recommended that changes to the bag limits might be more appropriate when updates to the stock status information is available next year. So overall, the group felt uncomfortable liberalizing measures less than halfway into the 7-year rebuilding plan. And also, we had a lot of discussion regarding the 2022 recruitment values and how uncertain they are and how they play into all these projections that were done. So given all those different factors, they recommended no changes. We also received some public comment. One individual asked if increasing ABCs and underperformance will create an opportunity for liberalization of recreational measures, and if a uniform bag limit between modes could be explored. There is more information from this individual. They provided a written comment that was put into the briefing book materials. And I'm going fast because I was told to go fast. So, in a nutshell, here are the measures again that we have in place. The bottom line, the commercial quota for 2025 is a little bit over 3 million pounds, and the recreational harvest limit is 15.70 million pounds. And those are the recreational bag limits that were recommended by the Monitoring Committee and Technical Committee. So no changes to any of these regulations. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Jose? John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Jose. Just curious, you mentioned a couple times that the high 2022 recruitment is suspect, yet is it more suspect than previous years where we had high recruitment? Is there any reason why 2022 is particularly, we have to be cautious about?
I think that in general terms, as John Hare actually indicated earlier today, typically those values at the end of the time series that you're looking are highly uncertain. The thing that is kind of a little bit like is to me, it really catches my attention is that MRIP value did not change from the prior year. You will expect that will increase somewhat. So I think that in combination with the fact that the stock assessment indicated that value for 2022 was the most uncertain value in the assessment kind of makes me think that caution is prudent.
Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Jose. From listening in on the monitoring committee, I was under the impression that there was going to be some work put into analyzing potential alternative bag limits just to see what the projections would be in comparison to the RHL. I mean, I don't think we can turn our eye entirely to the fact that there's a 31% increase in the RHL. The recent harvest estimates are 30% below that RHL. And in many other species, we would be looking at different measures to try to capitalize on that. So I was just wondering if that work was able to be done.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, we did that work as the monitoring committee. Actually, I have the information because if that came up, then we'll show that information. So if you want to see that now, we can do that. Okay, let me see if we can get there. All right. So to put this in context and just level with me a little bit, because I think that I have to go back to some work that was done in 2021. We can better understand what was done this time. In 2021, the council and board requested that the monitoring committee analyze the impacts of increasing a back limit for the for hire sector from 5 to 7 fish. And the work was done by Carson Cisneros from our staff, along with some other monitoring committee members. So in order to do this, 3 different methodologies were developed to analyze what landings will be like under different bag limits. And at that point, they used data from 2021 to 2022. And the reason I'm going over this, you have seen this before in a memo that was presented to you, but probably not everyone. So the first methodology assumes that anglers who caught the full 5 fish back limit will retain the higher back limit at 7. So this is kind of a methodology that has been used for many years to analyze changes in back limits. The second methodology, or the second method, Stephen, could you move forward, please? Move the slide. I cannot do it. Thank you. The second method calculates the percent reduction in harvest and assumes that the percent liberalization will be equal to that reduction. So it calculates what will happen if you go, for example, from a 5 fish to a 4 fish, and that percent reduction, then you assume that if you go from 5 fish to 6 fish, that will also be a liberalization. So it's just a linear approach. And the third one assumes a log linear relationship between the back limit and percent change in harvest. So those were the 3 different methods that were developed in 2021. Next, please. So here's the result of that analysis that was done. And these numbers here basically represent changes in the number of harvest fish. Now, for the work that was done now, we did things a little bit differently, but kind of following the same methodologies. Next, please. So the analysis that was recently conducted, and I want to thank Mike Celestino because he took the burden of developing this very quickly. This was done to accommodate a board member request to analyze impacts for private shore, a back limit of 5 fish for the private shore modes. What that means is that it was indicated, can you do an analysis of having the same back limits for both private shore and for higher modes? So this time around, Mike only analyzed methods 2 and 3. He dropped the first one. And the reason that was done is because back in 2021, when the monitoring committee and technical committee reviewed the work that was done, they indicated that those 2 methods were perhaps the most appropriate methods to analyze this type of work. And then the other thing that he did is that he used recent data from 2022 and 2023. In addition, Mike calculated the changes in harvested pounds. That's something that was not done before. And in order to do this, he used an average weight of 4.9 pounds for the for-hire sector and 3.2 pounds for the shore sector. Next slide, please. So this table here shows what the results are under the second method. So if you go there to the line that says private angler under 3 fish per back limit, that's where we are right now. And you can see that as you decrease from 3 fish to 2 fish, then you get a 7% reduction. And because this is a linear method, we also assume that if you go from 3 fish to 4 fish, then you're going to get a 7% increase. So there's a linear relationship there. And that's how this works. On the bottom, you have assuming that the for-hire sector measures stay at status quo. This will be the changes if you were to increase the back limits for the shore private rental modes only. Okay. So what you see there on the first row is the predicted AB1 value for under each one of those back limits. So under the 3 fish back limit, you have a predicted AB1 value of 5,076 metric tons. So that AB1 value is the average AB1 for the last two years. That's what is being used to predict what that value. And then as you go from 3 fish to 4 fish or from 3 fish to 2 fish, then we apply the changes, percentage changes that are on the top. Then on the second row, you have an adjusted predicted value. And the reason that was adjusted is because sometimes the predicted AB1 falls outside the 80% upper limit of the 80% confidence interval. So Mike used that to make an adjustment. So those are the adjusted values to that predicted AB1 values. Then we have the 2025 recreational harvest limit, which is 7121, and you have that the same value all the way across. And then you have the difference between the predicted value and the recreational harvest limit. Okay, so those negative numbers are just indicating to you that the adjusted predicted value is lower than the recreational harvest limit for next year. So if you were to go from a 3 fish back limit to a 5 fish back limit, the difference between the predicted AB1 values that will be landed and the recreational harvest limit is 2.1 million pounds. Next slide, please. The same type of analysis was done under methodology 3. And I'm not going to go over the top panel, but on the bottom panel, you see what the implications of that analysis are. And the way you interpret this is basically the same way I just did it for methodology number 2.
Nicola?
Thank you. Thank you for going through that, Jose. I'm just looking at this for the first time. So what I'm seeing is that the projection for a uniform 5-fish bag limit for projected harvest was that it would still be 2 to 3.5 million pounds below the RHL next year.
Thank you. That's exactly right, depending on which one of those two. Yeah. It will be in that range, given these two different methodologies. So again, the predicted AB1 values, that's just the average for the realized landings in the last 2 years. And the 2025 recreational harvest limit, obviously, that is that's being influenced by the increase in ABC for 2025. But again, as I indicated before, there is a lot of uncertainty from that year class that is driving these projections in the ABC, increases in the ABC that resulted in this increase in the RHL. But you're right, the interpretation that you just gave is correct.
Any other questions or comments? Chris Pat Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation and Mike Celestino for this analysis. This is very, very helpful. I guess regardless of whether we change the bag limit or not, and I should know this, so I'm sorry for asking, is say for 2024, it's hypothetically that we exceeded the recreational harvest limit for this year. When we look at specifications for next year, what is the accountability measure that would be put onto the recreational fishery for the following year, or I guess for 2026, or subsequent year? Yeah, when we look at this next year and we have an overage, what's the accountability measure? Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna before I have somebody else answer this question because I don't know the answer, because I just got back into Bluefish and I meant to look at this, but I didn't do it because I know this question was going to come up. I apologize for not doing my homework. But the other thing that I was going to say is that Mike Celestino worked very hard doing these numbers and kind of changing a little bit, modifying what was done before. But this was not reviewed again by the monitoring committee and technical committee, specifically the values that he used to come up with these numbers. But I mean, they seem to be within a very reasonable range to me. But I was wondering if you could help me with that, Emily. Thank you.
Yep, and as someone also moonlighting on Bluefish, I quickly pulled up the regulations. And so because biomass is currently below the biomass threshold, it's in a rebuilding plan. Similar to Fluke, Scup, Black Sea Bass, we have this tiered approach. It would, because we are in this poor biomass condition, require a pound for pound payback. So we would be paying back a potential overage.
Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mike Celestino for doing the analysis at my request, if you hadn't figured it out yet. I was interested to look at this. I think we can all remember that when we went from 15 fish down to the 3 and 5 fish limit at a single meeting, it was without much public comment. It was a quick decision, and it was not without some consternation. So at first glance, it looks like an opportunity to liberalize the private and shore mode just to get us go back to uniform measures that can be analyzed, more easily, have benefits in that regard. But I am influenced by the monitoring committee comments about the terminal year recruitment and the uncertainty there. So at this time, I just want to request, I guess, that next year when we have the next assessment and we come to this meeting, that this analysis is conducted earlier so that the advisory panel can look at it, the monitoring committee can look at it, the board and council can have some time to look at it and formulate an opinion prior than, right before voting. It's not, I'm a little bit frustrated by our Bluefish recreational measure setting process where we go from setting the RHL to setting the specs with no opportunity for public comment on the process. So I think if we could just work in this a little bit earlier, it would be an improvement to how we go about our business. Thank you.
Jose?
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment. And in fact, we have had already some early discussions about that. Thank you.
Joe Zamino?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Mike too, because he has asked that people stop saying his name. I thank Nicola for the question. It's really important that, that we do explore these things, but, when we're in a rebuilding plan, things are, scary to think of overages. And also I want to just point out that there's kind of a free fall in between things. And we saw that from going from 15 down to, where things actually matter. And so the idea of liberalization has that same danger of, you can be adding numbers of fish to this without, because of, what you see in the actual intercepts, that you got to get to probably a pretty high number before it starts to kick in that you're in trouble again, right? And so that's a scary thing too. So I do think we need to proceed with caution on this, and thank you for asking for the exploration, but also the consideration of waiting.
Chris Pat Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add on, the timing for spec setting for changing the bag limits this time of year is challenging. I think it's nice to know what is happening this current year, to make a decision on whether or not we want to liberalize the bag limit, especially when we're in a rebuilding plan and we only have data through wave 2, and wave 2 data actually showed that harvest was higher than the past couple of years. It was more in line with 2021, and to MRIP's credit, it aligns with at least anecdotal reports of large bluefish from North Carolina to Florida, maybe states north of us too, at least in through wave 2 and maybe into wave 3. But having more up-to-date wave information when we look at this next year, and we'll probably have to be a little later in the year, which could cause challenges too, I think would also be a good piece of information to have.
Any questions from the audience? Comments from the audience? And more discussion around the table? All right, with that, I believe we're done. Jose, do you have anything else to bring before us?
No, thank you.
All right, with that, thank you very much. That concludes the council plan for today. We're going to leave the board. They still have a little bit more work to do. And Chris, do you have an announcement?
Guess what? We have hospitality this evening in room 1516. Everyone's invited. See you there. Thanks.
With that, I'm going to adjourn the council and we will start back here bright and early, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, because I have to get to Florida. Alligators are on my mind.
And Chelsea's going to go ahead and move immediately into the presentation. So if the council members are not going to stay, if you could take it outside. So quietly walk outside so Chelsea can do her slides in 1 minute or less.
Okay. I think I just need the power. Oh, I have the power now. Okay, so we are going to go over the Bluefish FMP review of the 2023 fishing year. See if I have better. Oh, I can do it from my computer because I'm sharing. So up on the screen are the 8 components of the Bluefish FMP review, but because Jose just covered a majority of this information, I'm just going to skip forward to the PRT comments and recommendations. So Addendum 1 to the Bluefish FMP, which was implemented in 2012 and updated in 2021, was implemented to improve age and length data used in the stock assessment, and it requires the states of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, and now Florida to collect a minimum of 100 bluefish ages each year, with the goal of collecting 50 from the first half of the year and 50 from the second half of the year. This year, all states were in compliance with Addendum 1, with the exception of Rhode Island, which fell just short of the 100 ages requirement, and they collected 86 ages. However, the PRT determined that Rhode Island made a good faith effort to meet the biological sampling requirements. Rhode Island usually collects their samples through the for-hire fishery, and this year tried to incentivize the for-hire fleet through passing around bluefish hats. And when they realized that they weren't going to collect those 100 samples, they did try to supplement through the commercial fishery. So the PRT found that they made a good faith effort there. And the only other comment on the compliance reports this year, and unfortunately this was flagged after the PRT's review, but it was reviewed briefly by the monitoring committee, is that North Carolina's compliance report indicates a slight overage of their 2023 commercial quota. However, CAMS does not indicate this overage. And the monitoring committee and technical committee discussed that this is due to what is reported by federally permitted dealers versus what is reported by state permitted dealers. And in recent years, more bluefish landings have been going to those state permitted dealers. So the monitoring committee and technical committee are going to continue monitoring these discrepancies moving forward. And that is something that is considered by the Bluefish management uncertainty tool that Jose was briefly discussing before. But other than those 2 exceptions, the PRT determined that all states have implemented regulations consistent with the Bluefish FMP requirements. And then for de minimis requests, Maine, South Carolina, and Georgia all requested de minimis status and meet the requirements. And that wraps up the Bluefish FMP review presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions for Chelsea? All right. Do we need a motion to accept the FMP, Chelsea?
We do need a motion, and I have one prepared for anyone that wants to make it.
All right, we've got a, we have a question. All right, we have a motion by Nicola. Do we have a second? Who's making a second? Jim Gilmore makes the second. He's going to read it. Okay, go ahead.
I move to approve the Bluefish FMP review for the 2023 fishing year, state compliance reports, and de minimis requests from Maine, South Carolina, and Georgia.
All right, is anyone opposed to this motion? And the motion passes. And Chelsea, we have an election of a vice chair. All right. John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is my pleasure to nominate Mr. Eric Reed of Rhode Island as the vice chair of the Bluefish Board.
Thank you, John. Do we have a second? And I think I'm trying to look down who made the second. Oh, it's Sarah. Okay, Sarah made the second. Is anyone opposed to this motion? Should have guessed. All right, Eric, congratulations. You're vice chair of the Bluefish Board. All right. Any other business to bring forward to the Bluefish Board? Seeing none, I'll seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.